Yesterday was a very difficult show. We're going to try to strike a tone today that's about moving forward, even though I think it's a different reaction to 2016 because I think people were surprised and shocked and angered. And this time it's more just resignation and depression about where we truly are.
I am a little bit in a different place, whereas I think this is the pattern that people pointed to after 2016 and were ignored. The amount of people who said, Tara Raghavir, who is of Casey Tenants, tweeted out retweeted herself from 2022 saying, hey, if addressing inflation isn't enough if you don't do something about, say, rent prices and things like that. And instead we just decided to run a status quo presidency. And I don't know, it's time to kick a lot of these bums out that ran this campaign. Yep.
It's there will be a lot of autopsies done about what happened in this race. I think the primary narrative that we're seeing is the economy. A lot of elite media folks told people that the economy was doing amazing. And for people trading on Wall Street, it's there were the traditional capitalist measures of how the economy was doing did indicate that the economy was doing well. But for people who have to pay rent, for people who have to pay groceries, they were furious at the administration. And can you pop up this graph here? This is really instructive because once basically the Republicans took back the House and the COVID recovery was abandoned by the administration, you see this drop off here. Build Back Better being the central vision of the platform to start from 2020 into the beginning of 2022. And then, of course, Manchin and Sinema torpedoed much of it. But once again, the more austerity politics took hold and Biden tried to fashion himself as a modern LBJ by also supporting a disastrous foreign policy, bloody endeavor, and bloating the Pentagon budget, both for Ukraine, but also to support Israel. Things turned, and the child tax credit expired.
Inflation concern, and they decided, Biden, again, this chat is in emphases. He goes from emphasizing Build Back Better to national debt and deficit reduction. And how do we reduce that deficit, so-called? It was by not pursuing, say, or locking in the expanded child tax credit that have child poverty. So guess what happened to child poverty when it expired? It doubled.
It doubled. And then we were told all the time about how good the economy is doing. And that's going to be, I think, the main story. And it's part of the anti-incumbency backlash that you're seeing globally. And it's a failure of liberalism. And Harris took over an incumbent campaign, was shoehorned into it because Biden dropped out at the 11th hour. And she ran with his consultants. Who knows if she had actually run in a legitimate primary and there had been other candidates, like if Biden had done what he promised, that he would be a bridge candidate, what could have happened? There could have been a primary where people even knew who she was. I mean, you would be shocked. There are millions of Americans that have no idea who Kamala Harris is. And
the ones who do, can they say what she was actually running for besides not being Trump?
And so she was extremely disadvantaged in that way. And in the primary, she still would have been the favorite, right? But she would have had to develop a vision outside of continuing the Biden administration, which was unpopular. And that was the biggest problem, it appears, thus far in this race. And I will reiterate this. It's not something I think people love to hear, but I just feel it in my bones. Like there was misogyny at play here as well. I don't know how we can say that the Trump campaign that was cheering on, calling her a C word with their super PAC ads, and Trump laughing in the final days about how Kamala worked on a corner. To discount the role that misogyny played here, especially when she had higher favorables than someone like Hillary Clinton, you begin to see a bit of a through line. And it could have been different if Biden was more popular, right? In the way that AMLO is with Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico. Him leaving with a 60% approval rating and having a more popular agenda and handing it off to a woman as a successor, that advantaged her in that situation. Kamala was carrying the baggage of a really unpopular administration, and I think that opened a lot of the door for this misogyny. And what concerns me is definitely also what you see with men 18 to 29, who seem to be really buying into this. And we've been sounding the alarm about this on this program for a while. The manosphere, the edgelord stuff. And this is an entirely different media and communications environment that the Democrats need to reckon with here. You know, as I said, her turnout her door knocking operation, she went to all the swing states, which Hillary did, blanketed them. Her turnout, her ground game by every traditional metric was way superior to his. And it didn't matter because Trump was going on podcasts and he appealed and turned out those mid to low propensity voters. And the suburbs did not turn out for Kamala Harris. So the strategy just was completely wrong. And at the end of the day, let's play this clip from a Stead, I always forget his last name, Herndon. He is a New York Times reporter, and he has been covering this race by going around the country and actually talking to people. This was his assessment, and I just thought it was exactly right.
The biggest character in this race, to me, was not on the ballot in 2020. It was Joe Biden, in my opinion. Like, Joe Biden's refusal to do what he implied he would do in 2020 and transition to a different type of generation, allow Democrats to have a broader conversation about change, allow Democrats to be freed from the status quo, is not what happened. I think it would be easier for me to say that Donald Trump completed this mass realignment among the working class if we had a universe where the Democrats had a primary, where the Democrats nominated a candidate that was based around some set of ideas, and it was not tied to this administration so clearly and the status quo. But since that is not what happened, I think it has made the Republican ability to be the agents of change so much easier that I find it the biggest thing that has happened in this race. And I think speaks to what we're saying about what's happened over the last 3 months. The place that they were in before the candidate switch happened made it such that you could run a perfect race or whatever. And you are still playing on ground that brings you to 50-50. Because the biggest thing, in my opinion, that happened was they tied themselves to an unpopular administration and with it, the status quo.
That did not represent change.
And there was a lot of evidence that that was a bad idea.
So when we talk about the moments, the hinge points, and again, I don't know what could have changed. I agree with his analysis. Her not distancing herself from Biden on a number of issues is going to be discussed. But was it even possible in 100-ish days as the VP to do that? I don't know. But what I do know is that Biden here walked us with his hubris into a second Trump administration. Let's read some of these quotes from Democrats in Politico raging at Biden. He shouldn't have run, said Jim Manley, a top aide to former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. This is no time to pull punches or be concerned about anyone's feelings. He and his staff have done an enormous amount of damage to this country. According to interviews with nearly a dozen officials and party operatives, Biden squandered valuable months only to end in disaster on the debate stage. And by the time he decided to pass the torch, he had saddled Harris with too many challenges and far too little time to build a winning case for herself. The fresh anger at Biden came as Democrats devolved into a round of recriminations following Tuesday's decisive loss to Donald Trump, with officials struggling to explain why a majority of the electorate voted Republican for the first time in 20 years. Democratic leaders had hoped Harris could separate herself from Biden's deficiencies after taking over the nomination with just 107 days to the election. The candidate switch in July generated a fresh surge of enthusiasm with voters and appeared to instantly reset the race, bolstering the theory that she could eke out a win against an opponent as divisive as Trump. But any gains made during her abridged campaign were swamped on Tuesday by the enduring backlash against the Biden administration over inflation and cost of living concerns, and a president who proved incapable of selling the electorate on his accomplishments, and whose apparent overconfidence kept him in the campaign despite growing signs that he wasn't up for the job. She ran an extraordinary campaign with a very tough hand that was handed to her. Mark Longabaugh, a Democratic strategist and former advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, said of Harris, "The truth of the matter is Biden should have stepped aside earlier and let the party put together a longer game plan." I mean, hey, like, you know, Bernie was trying to get him to stay in, so that's an older advisor of Bernie Sanders. I disagreed with what Bernie was doing then. But the die, as it appears, it probably was already cast by that point. Now, let's play another clip of Ested, who went on, Ested Herndon, who went on Christiane Amanpour's show. I guess this is a guest host. And he was asked about the abortion issue in particular. As I mentioned, abortion measures did fairly well across the country, but that did not translate to the federal level or to creating the urgency for these white women, who a majority of them voted for Trump again, a person who has been found liable for sexual abuse, accused of sexual assault and rape dozens of times. This is what Herndon says he observed on the campaign trail as it relates to the issue of abortion.
Were literally on the ballot in multiple states. This was supposed to be the issue that galvanized so many people on the left. Did that pan out?
Well, I think we can definitely say that reproductive rights was not prioritized above other issues. And I don't think it's really a question of the left. What we see is that reproductive rights was meant to try to cut through, I think, particularly in the suburbs, so particularly give people a permission structure to vote for Harris, and then try to cast Donald Trump and Republicans largely as extreme. But one of the things that was true throughout kind of our travels is that people understood that Donald Trump had a different position on abortion rights than the rest of the party. And they would cite that often as a reason why they could support some abortion rights. And they did not think Donald Trump was like an existential threat to that freedom and still support him at the top of the ticket. And I think we saw some of that yesterday. I don't think it's if that the special elections that we saw from Democrats over the past 2 years were false or some mirage or something, but that the composition of people who vote in the presidential election are just prioritizing that top of the ballot over everything else. And frankly, the Democratic argument that abortion rights would outdo the economy, would overcome inflation, would overcome people's concerns about immigration. That clearly did not pan out to be true. And so I think it's going to be interesting where both parties kind of go next here too, because Donald Trump may have kind of flirted with a different abortion position than the rest of the party, but his ecosystem is still very anti-abortion in the way that's pretty outside of the median voter in the country. So I think both sides kind of an open question what to do going forward, but Democrats thought it was a kind of secret electoral sauce that it didn't turn out to be.
Well, let's talk.
It didn't turn out that way.
It's a massive crime that they depended on it to be that. And they squandered what should have been a headwind to get people out to the polls, to get further progress on other issues. And they used it to say, oh, maybe we have more leeway to support Israel because our base is going to turn out for this stuff anyway. Like, this is a conscious failure. When they say they expect it to be a secret sauce, that is criminal malpractice, and they blew rights for people. They
did, and they also, I mean, with the people not believing that Trump was extreme on abortion. This is what Matt's saying though. Like we couldn't rely on that because if that's what people still think, like you can't make an argument that Harrison Walls didn't message the abortion issue. You can't. Like they focused on it a lot. That wasn't the problem. Like
people aren't tuning in like that.
Trump is, for everything about his unfavorability, for his crudeness, for his criminality, for all of this, still people think he's less extreme on this issue than the Republicans. This is not a mandate for the Republican vision. This is an indictment on the Democrats. And we're going to have a lot of conversations about the future. And it's not one factor. But the lack of recognition as to what the economy really meant for people on a day-to-day basis, I think, is the driving narrative at this particular point. And, you know, you can say, like, yes, Biden was the most pro-labor president in decades, but he was unable to communicate. And the Democrats didn't communicate that. And this is what happens. So you can't just be like, well, look at the numbers. Look at all of this. Look at how Biden, you know, supported X and the UAW or whatever. If it's not penetrating, then it doesn't matter.
And if, I'm sorry, like the actual numbers are that, okay, we had a little bit of wage growth and some policy that counteracts, like we've had since 2008, just a collapse of, I mean, the middle class that Democrats campaign for so much. Like it's not going to take, it's going to take more than a little bit of wage growth for a certain sector of the economy while everything else is going up too. And the insanity that something like the child tax credit could expire and we're still telling people that the economy is fine. Look at the unemployment numbers, look at GDP growth relative to the G7. That just tells me that those people don't actually know somebody who like experiences poverty. And that's the problem.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, if I see one more liberal account scolding people for not having their opinion of what the economy looks like, I'm going to scream. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean,
then don't be in politics if you're not in the persuasion business. Like, I feel despondent about the misogyny element of it. I really do, and we'll see like how I feel in a week. But still, like that could have been overcome if the circumstances were a little bit different. I don't think it could have been overcome in 107 days. If we look at this now, Biden had to have dropped out earlier so we could have had a primary process where these really important issues for people on a day-to-day basis could have been articulated. And that could have brought attention to the party as a contrast to Donald Trump blowing microphones and calling Kamala a cunt. So like that, you know,
we needed the credibility of like they blow credibility when they say the economy's good. And then you wonder why people aren't getting the full message and people still turned out like on the abortion question on ballot lines for it. Right. And it's just they don't trust Democrats. That's the problem here. There's
yes.
a drag there. And like Tara Ragavir, one final point of Casey Tenets, there's the economy according to suits with elite degrees. And there's the economy according to working people who can't afford their rent or groceries. The first group calls the shots, but fundamentally lacks knowledge or curiosity about the second group.
At the end of the day, it's most likely, when we look back on this, that escaping the shadow of Biden's unpopularity was quite difficult. And she was also unwilling to do that because of a very conservative, small c, strategy. Although there was the entire thing was also appeals to Republicans, and none of that panned out in the suburbs. There needs to be a reimagination of how the Democrats run these national campaigns, but we said that after 2016. And
well, Bernie has the sauce, and they've suppressed it. I mean, I agree with Crystal Ball on this. Like all these groups that we're worried about that are leaving the Democrats now, working class groups. Bernie, like Latinos, Bernie was turning them out, and they suppressed him twice, called him sexist ahead of the Iowa primaries 2 straight times. Yeah.
And so, and that was Obama also, those kinds of politics. So we, to be clear-eyed going forward, we have to extricate that vision from the party.
We know the model.
And now it's time to get to work.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.